Hi, everybody. It's Tara and Lisa, psychologists at Southern Psychology here in Alberta. And we are talking about isolation. So, wow. I don't know if isolation is just such a hot topic that we don't even think of it as a hot topic anymore, but it's definitely still super important. So, we've been grappling with isolation, relationship dilemmas for 2-ish years now. And then I guess, Lisa, what sort of trends, what are the things that we're noticing clinically? What concerns do we have after all this time struggling with isolation?
Well, I think one of the things that I see a lot, and I don't know about you, Tara, but I think a lot of people often don't connect how the isolation has affected them. So it's almost like, yeah, this was this thing we had to do, and it just was the way things were. And now we're going to just come out of it and go right back to everyday life. And it's often missed what kind of an effect that had on the person for 2 years, for a lot of people, of seeing nobody but their family, or for seeing nobody but themselves and their colleagues. And so, we see an increase in, or at least I've seen an increase in, anxiety levels for a lot of people. A lot of people will come in and say, I've had anxiety in the past, and, anxiety's bothered me before, but it's to an extent right now, and I don't know where this is coming from. And then some of the depression challenges, because, people who maybe struggled with a bit of depression before suddenly lost all their ability to cope with it because they couldn't go out and they couldn't do things that were fun. And so then there's an increase in the levels of depression, and, then it kind of holds a person back from actually getting back out there and getting back into their life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, there's like some people who, whatever our quirks are, have shown up or been scratched in different ways, and we've been challenged in different ways. So then some people who it's harder to connect socially, now they've been more isolated for this 2-ish years, and those relationships that were hard to cultivate are lost. So there's people who've lost relationships. There's people who, were keeping secrets, have been keeping secrets for years, or maybe a couple months or whatever, but being locked in a home with maybe one other person, those secrets have been exposed, and then that's problematic. It's impacted relationships or shame or something like that. I think too, marriages, like I've seen some couples who are like, wow, you know what, I feel more confident that this is the person I want to be with. Let's fight hard for each other. And then other relationships who it's like, I'm done. I don't even care if I have a good reason. I'm not open to exploring why. I'm just done. So that's been really interesting. I have noticed quite a shift in couples therapy, because I do a lot more couples work. But our mental health is impacted.
Yeah. Yeah. And the relationships too. I mean, I think that's a really good point, because I also have seen, even though I don't do couples, I have seen people come in and they're just saying, like, I don't know what went wrong in our relationship. I don't know what's happening. And, it's caused them to maybe recognize some things about their significant other that they didn't see before, or to start finding certain things about that person irritating that, before it really wasn't. But when you're stuck together 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, some of that stuff you were able to let go, now you can't let go of as much.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the tricks and difficulties of blended families, and parent alienation, there's a lot of complexities, court involvement in family systems. I do not do high conflict, so if you're looking for that, I'm not a therapist, but I have lamented, come alongside of families where COVID isolation really perpetuated fractures between some broken homes or blended families, and a parent being moved further away from their child. And that's always concerning for children mental health, because kids need freedom to love both mom and dad.
Mm-hmm.
And this isolation has complicated that for a lot of children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting how far reaching the fallout is, I think,
Yeah.
because, most people, if you talk to them about isolation, it's more like, oh, well, I was bored. It's just the boredom got to me, or, I was lonely or whatever, right? That's sort of like your in your face immediate go-tos. But, the number of areas of a person's life, and most people's life that have been affected by this, from their own personal, concept of self to their ability to do things that never used to cause them anxiety, but now that they haven't done them for a while do cause them a lot of anxiety. Or even in situations where I have some people and they're like, I just can't handle people anymore.
Yeah.
They're like, well, normally this stuff wouldn't have bothered me. I'd just been like, well, people are people and sometimes they do odd things, but now I just can't put up with them and I don't know what's wrong. And, so a lot of our tolerance has shifted, I think, a little bit as well, just from not having to deal with certain things on a daily basis. So,
yeah, I think tolerance is a good word. And then with the children, we've talked about this. I talked about this with Megan and Ellis. I'm very aware of it because of my own children. Separation anxiety, man. And it's so interesting with my daughter and her little friends. And it was like, remember when we used to go to concerts and they do the wave? But that's how I sort of saw it with the kids. It's like one kid had it and then another kid and then another kid. And it was so hard when my daughter went through it, because one of the things I admire about her is this confidence. But when I empathize or when I look at other grown-ups, our tolerance is tested. And so I wonder how that connects to this theme of separation anxiety, social anxiety for children and teens, co-sleeping. Another one that, again, because of the isolation, these little people are trying to figure it out. Well, to me, it makes sense that co-sleeping and separation anxiety would show up for the little ones. And then with teens, it's like, oh man, it's hard. It's teenage years are so full of angst and developmental shifts and independence, dependence, love, sexuality, identity, all these things. So it is a mixed bag, but we do see a lot more self-harm again. Yeah. And then misuse of media. A lot of misuse of media.
Yeah. Well, but I think if you think about kind of developmentally with teens, seeing that kind of behaviors develop to fill out that missing space to a degree makes sense, because when you hit teenagehood, that's when your friends become like the most important thing in your life. So yeah, mom and dad might be okay, and okay maybe teachers, but kind of identifying with your friends and building those friend groups and making those connections are some of the most important things in your life. And when you can't do that and that's missing, then people will look to fill it with something.
Yeah. And that's what we do. We have, all throughout the pandemic on our blog, we have all sorts of different topics and like vices, part of inner isolation. All of us had vices. All of us had our sort of things because our brain is hot and it wasn't coming down. We weren't able to come down to whatever we've known as a baseline space in our brain. There's so much activation, and then we're alone and we're limited, and that goes against our nature and our nurture from a psychology point of view. Our nature, how we are designed as people, is to be in relationships. And then the nurture that we are set and wired to be in attachment and to have our attachment system and our central nervous system activated in relationships, which we have been for how many years? 5 years, 20 years, 65 years, and then poof. Maybe I have no central nervous system, no person with me, or maybe I have one. And then all of this other stuff gets more intense because there's only one, and they have all their wants and needs and fears, and I have all my wants and fears and needs.
Yeah. Well, and the likelihood of any one individual being able to meet all of your needs is, probably pretty minuscule. But then you end up in a situation, well, that's the only person you've got. And sometimes it's not even a conscious thing because, you know, a lot of this stuff is instinctual for us.
Totally. And we all have unmet needs and we all have fears about who we are. And so isolation is a pressure cooker. And it really is, it's a space of deficit. Like as clinicians, and I didn't ask you this before, and I'm asking myself this right now organically. Like how does isolation limit our ability to work with people in isolation? And you had some unique experiences during COVID working in the hospital because people were extremely isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And then how does that impact our clients' ability? How does that impact our ability to work with clients
Mm-hmm.
when relationship is not a viable tool to include in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think, you know, between the different types of practice, because, you know, at that time I was still over at the hospital and you were primarily in private practice, you know, I mean, life didn't change hugely drastically for me because, you know, most of the time you're at work. And so you'd be working and connecting with your coworkers and, you know, you're still involved in group projects and things like that. And, you know, you get pulled to help with this or that or whatever. So there was still that level of connection. You know, it's not the intimate friendship connection, but there's still some sort of connection with other people. So I think that in a way did help create a certain amount of balance for me because I wasn't in absolute isolation. So I'm thinking that may have made things, and I don't know what you think, Tara, but it may have made things a little bit, in a way, in certain ways, easier because I still had some kind of connection versus, say, someone who's just with their family 24 hours a day.
Yeah, I mean, I like where you're going to because you're sort of noticing it as your own experience. And I know for me, I was able to go into Sojourn and work from my office because it was only me and the two other owners, and we have a big space, and we were nowhere near each other. And I couldn't work at home because my kids were so little and so loud. Um, but even just going into an office space was really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And that normalcy. But then there's people who had to work from home.
Yeah.
And then there's people who didn't have anybody around them. Or there's people who realized that they were in a home situation that was actually really, really unhappy for them.
Mm-hmm.
What I like that you're saying too, Lisa, that actually is very relieving for me is that some of the more marginalized individuals, the most at-risk mental health individuals during COVID that were in the hospital, they had a lot of structure.
Mm-hmm.
They had a lot of normalcy. There was some things that were really safe and predictable, and that's nice to know because we don't all know what's gone on for marginalized populations.
Yeah. No, we really all kicked in and like we shifted our practices, some of us about 180 with what we were doing. And, you know, we wanted to, because one of the things that actually does keep everybody relatively settled and okay in those types of situations is predictable, continuous activity. So if there's a certainty of what's going to happen next and there's not boredom, then it keeps everybody a lot safer. So we really, I mean, our work got way more intense when COVID happened than it, you know. So it by the time we got home from work, we didn't want to do anything anyway. So, but yeah, no, it was an adventure, and I think that's one of the things that it's good to keep in mind with all of this is that nobody's in our lifetime or in close to our lifetime has been through something like this before.
Yeah, and if people have, it's just different. It's on our land. You know, everybody can say that, but for us, sort of, you know, and this is speaking from a place of privilege as a North American and a Canadian, we haven't had this type of perpetual long-term distress in Alberta.
Mm-hmm.
But too, you know, when you're speaking about what was good at the hospital and what you guys prioritized was like safety, consistency, predictability, you know, based on keeping emotion and affect and content tolerable. And so here we have been for the past 2 years in isolation, inconsistency, unpredictability, heightened emotion. And someone said to me the other day, a colleague was like, it's like we all got used to watching the news or watching Dina Hinshaw, and it's like we got used to like almost like an addiction, looking for that hit of the like, what's going to happen. And I know lots of people stopped watching news, stopped listening to Dina Hinshaw, stopped all these things. But how many of us kept looking for that hit? Like we got used to, there's no baseline anymore. So then how do I know that I'm stuck up here? My adrenaline is stuck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I think too, we always got announcements about, oh, the numbers are up or up or up, but then they just stopped. So I find a lot of people are really struggling because you've spent the last 2 years planning your life around the numbers, right? Like, is this going to happen or is it not? And now all of a sudden there's no numbers and people are like, what do I do? What if I'm wrong? What if I make the wrong decision? What if the numbers are up and I don't know it? So I do see, it's maybe not even just those specific sources for everybody, but most of us were watching numbers in some way, shape, or form.
I wonder if there's some self-reflection there for us. Like if we would take a meeting with ourselves or go for coffee and each one of us evaluate our experience through COVID. Like, what was isolation? What were my core relationships? How did I move in? How did I move out? What vices did I have in my life? What sort of adrenaline seeking did I start to do? What became religious or ritualistic for me? Mm-hmm. And then how am I going to shift? My expectation is we're not going to pay attention to COVID numbers for the rest of our lives. Mm-hmm. But then someone else might not have thought about that. And so then it's alarming. And my alarm bells go off because there's no numbers. And if I'm not paying attention and experiencing and noticing and navigating that, then am I going to look for more alarm bells? Mm-hmm. Because that's what we do with trauma. And then the weird thing about what is PTSD right now, and I don't really have a great answer personally. We're all kind of in PTSD land. There's a risk here. And other colleagues, I don't know of conversations you've had, Lisa, but we're kind of like, what's this going to mean? What's this going to look like? Are we going to have all sorts of different types of PTSD from COVID?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think it's going to be kind of those to be determined situations that, in 20 years, we'll look back on it and say, well, now we know all these new things about PTSD. But, in order to get there, we have to kind of go through the process of sorting it out. And
that's so true. That's so true.
Yeah. And I totally agree. It's just with the variation among people and how people cope with different things and their ability to tolerate different things. I mean, it's going to probably take a while to sort out what exactly we're looking at and because we can help with some of the symptoms and stuff like that, obviously right out of the gate. But sometimes if you're able to kind of know what areas you're looking into or where it might be coming from, that can be a little more helpful in treatment. So
yeah, I mean, the truth is, what I would say to anybody who's concerned, maybe I'll be someone who gets PTSD or I have it, I think I might have some symptoms, is do go to a clinician. And I would say go to an EMDR clinician. Because what my experience with EMDR is, if you can do it as quickly after crisis or trauma, it's very, very efficient treatment.
Yeah.
And it's pretty dang cool treatment. Yeah. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, I agree. It can move relatively quickly, which is nice because I've had a few that have moved really faster than they expected, and it's just resolved relatively quickly. So yeah,
there's a lot of hope in that. And again, we will rekindle hope and things. And we are, the only way out of isolation is through relationship. And isolation is the enemy of mental health. And I've been saying that the whole way through the pandemic. Isolation is the enemy of mental health, and it has impacted all of our mental health. It's impacted mine. I notice how my biological body has responded to the trauma in different ways. And I mean, people like weight gain or slower metabolism is a real common one for most of us because, we're eating our feelings and then our metabolism isn't working that great. It's just like a normal common thing, but paying attention to like physically, how am I doing? What's worked in the past for my life satisfaction that I don't do or I don't know how to do, I don't feel capable of doing. How's my sleeping? How's my eating? How's my just like evaluating ourselves. How am I doing? So the PTSD thing is one. The other thing is like when we're stuck in adrenaline, we get tired. It's like sometimes it's even in specific cases it is adrenal fatigue, but our adrenaline is tired. And so burnout is another thing. Like people are having a hard time working, and lots of people are burning out.
Yeah, I've actually noticed a lot in the education areas of education that there's been a lot of burnout. I think just because of the randomness of it. There was no stability. Nobody knew really what was happening, and so yeah, I'm seeing too a lot of the burnout or just the anxiety levels that make it impossible to go to work right for the next little bit, just because being in that uncertainty has really shaken a lot of people.
Yeah, we're uncertain. There's inconsistency. There's things we kind of get used to something and then kind of get used to this and then we've all been going through that and it's impacting us as individuals. And then we're in isolation. So there is this old good thing, like relationships are helpful and it's part of our design. It's how we function in the world. And there's limits on all of us right now. And then we can't cope as easily. We just can't.
Yeah. I think just when we're talking about kind of moving out of isolation and back into the world, one of the things that I have noticed that's been maybe a little more positive is that a lot of families have been really doing this reevaluation of, okay, looking at everything we used to do pre-COVID, and it's not just families, it's people in general. Everything I used to do pre-COVID, do I want to continue with this? Do I want to go back to that level of busyness? Do I want to, so there's been some reevaluation there, which I think has been in a way positive. I mean, it's still with the uncertainty that causes concern, so it doesn't by any means make everything better. But it's been really nice to see probably people take that step back and evaluate that normally would never have thought to do so.
Yeah, I agree. And that making meaning, Viktor Frankl, bad things happen, we make meaning from them. And man searching for meaning, Viktor Frankl, if you're looking for something to be like, what do we do in these dark, dark times? And then I think too, it's like I come alongside of people who have been doing a lovely job of just trying to pursue that meaning and name it and have an action plan towards meaning. And it's hard. And that's okay too. Like it's really hard to shift our old way of being, that we're going through something hard and now I'm shifting. And then it's just still a really hard time. So that is too.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just accepting the ways something like this has changed. Us, because a lot of times, I see it more in people I work with that have had like an onset of a major mental illness or even a physical illness, and they go through a period of high stress or intense demand on themselves, and they come out the other side, and sometimes they're like, man, I wish I was the person I was before all this happened. And as much as maybe that's what they wish, these things do cause positive and negative and neutral changes in us, and we learn and we grow and things will be different. But sometimes it's hard to accept that this happened and we didn't want it to happen. We weren't looking to change, but we changed anyway.
Yeah. So. And that is life. We weren't looking to change, but we changed anyway, and change is good, and it's good to be outside of our comfort zone. I mean, except for if it's trauma zone, it's not the greatest. But it's hard and it's uncomfortable for all of us. And then I think too, it's like Fred Rogers' mom, you know, when they're said when bad things happen in the world, look for the helpers. I'm totally paraphrasing, but that's such a famous quote. And so I look at COVID, and I remember doing a blog on this, but something that was extremely helpful for me early on in the uncertainty. And as psychologists, we thought, what are we going to do? Like, now do we only work with people who are in extreme crisis where it's like, you know, a dog's chasing them and we have to help them or something? I was like, I don't know what it's going to mean. But quite quickly, actually, what I realized was if the people who were reaching out for people, we were just working on the things that we're working on. Therapy was therapy.
Yeah.
Like I'm working on my humanity. So people who continue to work on themselves with psychological care, I was like, oh, wow. So we're just really humans working on our humanity, whether there's this global crisis or it's Tuesday. And that was comforting for me. I don't know about you, Lisa, like what you sort of started to notice of like, okay, this is where my hopefulness is during this time.
Well, I think for me, and this is something that I'll often mention to people, is that, you know, just to see and really recognize the breadth of our adaptability as human beings. You know, we may not be thrilled with the way things are, but people are able to adapt and figure out how to make things work. And I think, you know, that for me has been something that I've really put a lot of hope into, because it's, you know, well, it might not look like it looked before, but people will pursue goals and they will figure out how to make stuff work. And, you know, normally you see that on a smaller scale, but to see it on a larger scale, even, for example, all of the companies that are doing home delivery for groceries now.
Yeah.
You know, the first question, well, how are we going to get food? We're going to have to line up for hours and hours to get, you know, into the store and whatever. And then somebody was like, hey, why don't we do this? And then people just adapted.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think to me, that brings me a lot of hope in a lot of situations, because sometimes when you look at society as a whole and you see things that you're like, oh my goodness, you know, the world's falling apart, we forget that people are extremely adaptable and they can figure out how to make things work when it seems like it's not possible.
Yeah, I mean, that has been surprising, and it will be curious. I am very curious as we continue to adapt and see how things unfold, knowing that isolation is still a problem.
Yeah.
And it's just, we can't keep it from a health perspective, a psychological health and a physical, biological health. The isolation thing is going to keep changing for a while because we're still far too isolated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because, you know, human beings, we don't like change. We get into our rut and that's where we stay. And it's easier to just keep doing what we've been doing than it is to realize that, okay, maybe this is not the healthiest choice. Maybe I need to kind of crawl out of my shell a bit now.
Well, and I mean, and two, it's, yeah, I just think for myself, it's like, it would be nice to stay at home because my pajamas fit me way better than my jeans. But I'll tell you, this is my tip and trick is I just have gone back to leggings, guys. It's like Lululemon isn't going anywhere anytime fast because you can get away with Lululemon at work.
Good plan. Good plan.
Right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Anything else, Lisa? Like, I think this is kind of like the pieces that we wanted to cover about isolation and lamenting about where we're at right now and where we've been.
Yeah. No, I think that's about everything we wanted to cover.
Yeah, and I mean, what's lovely with Sojourn is we do like to come into our office, and it's like I mean that's working for me, and it's nice to be able to, like right now Lisa and I are not in the same room, but it's so lovely to be in the same room with somebody else. Albeit if you haven't, it is nerve-wracking when you go back in. And if you are still in isolation and you're going to challenge yourself to step outside of it, it does feel like the first day of school.
Yeah. It
really does. And we all know this too. I remember high school and junior high, and I I remind people of this because it's so normal. It takes a week or two.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay. It's gonna be hard, but once we get used to it, it's lovely to be in the same room with people that we admire and have a safe relationship with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, Lisa.
You're welcome.
Bye,
See ya.
everybody.